Hi, I'm Laura Blaze, editor here at Bookstr, and I am joined by Michelle Halkett, publisher of Central Avenue Publishing. Thank you so much for joining me, Michelle.
Thanks, Laura Blaze. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you all the way from Vancouver.
I know, we're on opposite sides of the world.
I know, it's amazing. Isn't technology fantastic?
It is.
So Bookstr and Central Avenue first worked together on an anthology called Disconnected, which was a collection of short stories and poetry put together mainly by poets who became famous on social media, including the likes of Amanda Lovelace and Nikita Gill. So I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about the process of putting together Disconnected, because it was a little bit unusual, wasn't it?
Yeah, I guess it was. I mean, the origin of the book came about when someone said to me that they thought poetry was the new adult coloring book. And what they were referring to was this fad, or this crazy trend of where adult coloring books went crazy for a while, and then they just promptly dropped off the face of the planet. And it made me think, well, I don't think that's the same as poetry at all. I mean, poetry has been around for millennia, and it's just evolving, much like everything else is. And so I guess this started as a project of trying to prove people wrong, that it wasn't a trend, and that social media poets, for lack of a better word, are multi-talented people who put a lot into their craft. And so that's kind of how it got started.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And so so it basically was that each contributor, so I think there was 13 contributors, and each contributor wrote poems, and each contributor was given a poem by one of the other contributors and wrote a short story based on that poem.
Right.
So yeah, how did you work that?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, the first thing was trying to find the people who would contribute to the book. And basically the way that I did that was contact poets who I was a fan of. So I'm on social media, on Instagram and Twitter and the like. And I had already been following people like Amanda Lovelace, Nikita Gill, there were a few others. And I was also already working with a few because I'd published their books, and that was Ian Thomas and Trista Mateer. And so I got together kind of this group of 5 or 6 people who I approached and said, hey, this is the project I'm thinking about. What would you like to contribute? And luckily they said yes. And so then I had about, like 5 or 6 or so, and they were all fairly popular poets, people who had sold tens, if not hundreds of thousands of books all over the world. And I mean, this book was born out of a bit of an altruism. And so I asked them if there were any up and coming poets or not yet read poets who would be interested in working on it. And I was able to get the remaining poets from recommendations from the people I'd already gone to. Yeah, and so I think in total we had 10 fully participating poets, and then one of the poets, Pierre-Alec Gentil, contributed the foreword as well.
Fantastic. It's so interesting. And did you just like pick the names out of a hat? I know in the book you can see the names and everything, like as if they've been like torn up on little pieces of paper.
Yeah, that's
you literally just like
it was actually out of a Starbucks cup. So I wrote all
very modern.
Yeah, and it was funny because some of the poets knew each other already, and some of them were from the States, some were Canadian, some were from other parts of the world. And I didn't want my own bias to affect who was working with who. So that was the reason for the random choosing of the names. And it's funny because when I started pulling the names out, I put them in this circle, and I was like, oh, I really like that Amanda and Ian are together, and I really like that the 2 Canadians are, at this point in the clock or whatever. So it worked out really well. And so the way it worked was that each poet had to contribute 3 poems. And then those 3 poems were sent to the next person on the list, or in the clock. And then that poet could choose one of the poems and write a short story based on what they got out of it. It started out that if they had incorporated a line or so from one of the poems, they got bonus points, but all of them did it. So we just made that as part of the book, that, you know, you had to look for the piece of the poem in the short story.
It's a brilliant prompt. And it's funny as well, because a lot of them weren't story writers, really. They were primarily poets.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting, just as a reader, to see them kind of cross genre, because obviously short story isn't really a genre that's kind of transferable onto social media in the way that poetry is.
No, that's right.
Yeah. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that
Yeah.
the diversity of experience that they all had was interesting to see it all come together, because some of the poets are short story writers, or they've even written novels. Ian Thomas has written a novel. Kinesia Lubrin, who's a poet laureate pretty much in Canada, she has experience with short stories. Trista Mateer. There were several that had experience with it, and there were some who said this was their first time writing short stories, and they loved it so much that they wanted to do more. Nikita Gill really had fun with the process, and I had a lot of fun working with her as well. And her book of short stories came out last fall. And so, hers is a combination of short stories and poetry as well. But it was really lovely to see all that come together.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and it's really evident when you're reading it as well. Kind of the also the kind of literary chemistry between all the different writers.
Yeah,
it really comes across. It's amazing.
Oh, thanks. Thank
you.
Thank you.
And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit. I know that you're a big fan of social media poetry, and have said it's kind of like a natural evolution for poetry. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and kind of where you see poetry going now from here.
Sure. I guess I first want to say that I wouldn't consider myself an expert in poetry. I mean, there are people who dedicate their education and their lives to reading, writing, studying poetry and its history and its place in the modern world. So I am not one of those people. That said, I've always enjoyed poetry. I started working with Ian Thomas 8 years ago, and he was writing this kind of poetry that was easily shared on the internet. And it was kind of almost before social media. I mean, he was on Facebook, or he had a Tumblr, sort of the early versions of social media. And there were a few others as well who were online doing similar types of things. Not a lot, but a few. So for me, I don't know if I really see that social media poetry is a thing. I kind of just call it all poetry. And social media is where some people happen to share their work. Others might share it in a coffee shop through spoken word or on a stage. Others publish books. Others publish their work on social media. So I hesitate to call it Insta poetry or social media poetry, because it really just is poetry. Now, that said, I think social media lends itself well to poetry because it's a great way of spreading a few words at a time, particularly on places like Twitter and Instagram. And poetry in general, what I would call modern poetry or short form or free verse, is particularly loved by the younger generation. And that's because it's emotive, it's instant, it captures a feeling really quickly and well. And it's the younger generations who are also embracing social media more so. They're growing up with it. It's just normal for them. So the two of them go really well together. I mean, every day on my phone, I get a little notification from Courtney Peppernell, who is also a poet and going to be in the next version of Disconnected. But I get a little notification on my phone, much like you would get a text, that is one of her poems. And I'm like, oh, I really love that. Like, I love that little injection of positivity or art in my day when I'm least expecting it.
Absolutely. Oh, that's so nice.
Okay.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It's kind of, it is just an evolution of the form as opposed to something completely separate. Absolutely. Yeah, and so you mentioned Disconnected 2, the sequel. What can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course I have to plug the books that I publish, right?
Yeah.
I had a lot of fun working on volume 1 of Disconnected. It took me by surprise. It was a surprise. It challenged me in ways that I haven't been challenged. I've published almost 150 books, most of them in, in fiction, like young adult or adult fiction. And so working on an anthology of short stories was a lot different process. There were, 10 different personalities and 10 different ways of working, whereas normally you're just working with one author. So I had so much fun doing that I'm going to try it again. And so I just went to 10 more poets who I'm a fan of and asked them if they'd be interested. The funny thing is, on the first one that I went to, I'm pretty sure everyone said yes right away. I don't think that there was anyone that said no, although I could be not remembering the right thing. But on this one, I did push myself a little bit, and I reached out to people who, were spoken word poets, like Rudy Francisco, who may not be that interested, and I didn't get responses. But there are people that I've been huge fans of for a long time. People like Tyler Knott Gregson, Courtney Peppernell, Wilder, who's very popular on social media, on Instagram. I'm really excited about this, and I've also found some yet to be known poets who will hopefully get a platform to show off their voice as well.
That's awesome. That's amazing. Yeah, we're super excited to see it, and hopefully we'll have you on again to talk about it at that point. Yeah. So as you mentioned, you've published over 150 books in your career. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about your career in the publishing industry, because it's definitely something people are interested in, and it can often be a little unclear to people where to start with publishing, how to get involved.
Well, I think much like I'm not an expert in poetry, I'm not really an expert in publishing either. My career was spent in market research and economics. And I don't know, you could say that I either got tired of it or I had a midlife crisis. I don't know, but I decided to give it all up. And I ended up moving to Hawaii for a little while. And I wanted to surf, and I wanted to learn to speak Spanish, and figure out how to have a career that would challenge me in different ways. I've always been a book lover. I have been reading and reading and reading ever since I can remember. And I can't write, but I wanted to find a way to help others get published. So at the time, there was this thing called ebooks. And it was a really fractured market. It was so different than what it is now. Nobody really knew what they were, but the way I saw it was this way to get into publishing without that huge barrier that was there currently. And so I remember, sort of getting everything together and, coding my first ebook and showing my phone to people, and they'd be like, "Why do you want to, read a book on your phone?" I'm like, "You watch, you will."
Yeah.
It was a couple years later that the whole Kindle thing really took off, and the ebook market started, condensing into a couple of bigger providers. And by that time, I had already been publishing, quite a few books, and so I made a lot of mistakes and learned a lot. And what that sort of rising tide of ebook popularity did was give me a platform to move into a more traditional model where I could take on the books that I really felt passionate about and distribute them in a more traditional way. So for almost the last 4 years, I've been working with a distributor, and so now I have a sales team and title development professionals I can turn to that help me get my books into bookstores. And I've been quite fortunate that Everyone from indies to libraries to big chains like Target, Barnes & Noble, Indigo. They've all been very supportive of the titles that I've been producing. And yeah, you'll see a lot of them in your local bookstore and across the continent. So yeah, it's been really amazing. As for advice on getting into the industry, I don't know. I mean, there's sort of that traditional track where kids, go to school and then they get an internship at a publisher and they, go into the editing or marketing that way. And then there's the kind of crazy way that I sort of found myself doing it. So I don't know which one will work better because you just have to do what feels right for you, I think. If you're an author who is looking to get published, there's also, I think the great thing about the industry now is that there are so many ways to get your work out there. You can choose to self-publish and be your own publisher and have all the control yourself to set prices, to control where your book is being distributed. Or you can go to a traditional publisher with and you'll need to have an agent and all that kind of thing. But whatever it is you do, I think you have to stay true to yourself and know what it is that drives you. If you're the kind of person that just wants to write and have a hand in marketing, then probably the traditional route is the way to go, where you get an agent, you get a traditional publisher to do it all. But if you've got a business mind and you love, or you're entrepreneurial, then I would wholly support the whole self-publishing route.
Great, brilliant advice. Yeah. And it's interesting because you can get into it, various different ways. I think people sometimes can get a little bit tunnel visiony on like, oh, well, I didn't get the right internship and stuff. But actually, as in your case, you can come to it after other things and from all different angles as well.
I should mention about the internships. Like I get emails from or I get connected with people in the most interesting ways, and social media has been an amazing tool for my business. It's how I found authors at first, and Dean Mays was one of the authors that you interviewed a little while ago.
Yes.
And we met on Twitter.
Okay.
And then I met one of the interns I worked with over the summer. I had met her mom through social media as well. And then, this woman, Taylor Hine, contacted me and said, I'm off for the summer. This is my passion. Would you have any projects you'd be interested in having me work on? So there's lots of different ways to connect with people now, which is pretty special.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, another benefit of social media.
Yeah.
So when you are looking through your manuscript pile, what is it that you're looking for? What kind of what are the sort of things you look out for in a manuscript that you think could really work?
So there's three things that I always look for in every book. That's characters, quality of writing, and the plot. So the first thing I'll do is when I'm looking through the list is I'll look for a book that interests me first. Because it's really just me working with a team of, sales and marketing people, but it's me just mostly on the editorial side. I am looking for books that resonate with me because I figure, I have to work with this book for the next year and a half or two, and I want to feel really passionate about it. That's really important to me. So that's the first thing I look for. Then I read the first 3 chapters if it's something that I think is going to be interesting. So I read the first 3 chapters and I'll know right away if those 3 things that I said I was looking for, the characters, the plot, and the writing, I'll know right away if those are there. If they are, then I get really stalkerish and I go and I research the author. So what is their platform? What kind of person are they? What have they done before? And it's not that I'm looking for people who have only had bestsellers before, but like I said about me liking the book, I also need to feel like I like the author. So I'll research them online and then we'll set up a Skype or a telephone call. And if we both feel good about each other, then it's a go.
Awesome. That's great. And so what are the kind of books that you would generally like to read? What are your kind of your preferences generally?
So let's see. You know, it's funny because my daughter just asked me, what are the favorite books that you've published? Like, what are your favorite books? And this is my daughter asking me this. And I thought, ooh, that's a really tough question to answer, because that's like making me pick between my kids. Favorite kid. So I told her it's impossible to pick them. But I think each of them are special to me, but I like them for different reasons, maybe because of when they came along in my life or in my career, or what happened to them after they had been published. So that's a hard one to answer, but which one is my favorite? But in terms of what I like personally, I tend to be attracted to literary fiction, historical fiction. I love fantasy. I love magical realism. What else? I think that would be it. I guess if I had to name, do you want me to name some books?
Yeah, always.
Okay. All right. So my very first favorite were the Little House on the Prairie books by Laura Ingalls Wilder. And I read and reread those, I can't even tell you how many times. As a young person, I loved Anne Rice and all of the witches and vampire series that she had written. As a sort of middle adult, like in my 30s, I love Neil Gaiman, and I've read tons of his, pretty much all of his books. And then more recently, I would say that I've been attracted to books like The Gargoyle by Andrew Davidson. I love Lord of the Rings. Art of Racing in the Rain by, what's his name? Garth Stein. What else? I have a list. Oh, Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. I'm a fairly spiritual person, so that book really resonated with me. And I also love anything by Carl Sagan. I think in another lifetime I'd be a physicist or something like that, but I'd have to be a lot better at math. So anything about, by Stephen Hawking or Carl Sagan, I've loved reading as well.
Wow, it's such an eclectic mix list.
It is. I know. Yeah. I started writing them down, and I was thinking, wow, that is really different. Yeah. But I think that's the beauty of books, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, I guess in your line of work, it's important to have read widely and to have a good sense of what you like, and all over the map, basically.
Yeah. I've heard many authors say this as well, that you're only as good a writer as the books that you're reading. You need to read in order to be able to write. And that's absolutely true, because when you read what other people have done and how they've done it, it brings so much to your own writing, and to me as an editor as well. When I read something like All the Light We Cannot See, which won every award
every award ever. Yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely fantastic when you look at the wordcraft and the way the story is constructed. So those are things that you can learn as a writer and as a publishing professional as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Fantastic. So we're going to start taking some questions from the comments now. So if you're watching and you have a question for Michelle, make sure to put your questions in the comments now. So the first is actually just a comment from Nisa, who says, "I love the poem to short story concept," which I'd say is a pretty popular opinion. It's such a cool concept.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. Nisa, thank you so much for that. And I do want to eat, so I don't just publish books, for the fun of it. But this book honestly was born out of altruism. It was born out of that. I'm going to show you that poets can write longer form, and I will give them a platform to do that, because a lot of publishers, they're saying, okay, well, you're a poet, so you're going to write poetry, and they don't understand that there is this other talent. But there's also this, there was this desire for me to ask readers to read something longer as well. And I'm, the mother of teenagers, and I see that they don't read as much as they used to when they were little kids, but they are reading. It's just a different type of reading. And so it was this desire to push readers to take someone who they love, like Amanda Lovelace or Nikita Gill or Ian Thomas, Tristan Mattier, any of those people, and read something else that they had written. So I hope she likes that. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just feel like whoever would pick up the book liking poetry or liking a short story would be kind of instantly turned on to the other art form too. Which, yeah, definitely. And I hope that there are many incarnations of it to come. The next one sounds amazing too. So
I hope so. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So Heather asks, how did you come up with the name Central Avenue Publishing? Good question.
Well, this is embarrassing,
Explain.
actually. Okay, so remember I talked about the first iteration of my company. So it was a bit of a DIY kind of thing. Like basically, people would send me books, and I would put out whatever they had sent me. And so the name of it was ireadiwrite.com, and that was, or I Read I Write Publishing. And when I decided to move into a more traditional model, I wasn't sure about the whole I thing, because it also sounded like an iPod and iPhone and all that. So I was like, what am I going to call this? And I was really busy at the time and I couldn't think of anything. But I happened to live on Central Avenue. And so that's what I did, was I called it Central Avenue Publishing. Cool. But what resonated with me was the idea of it being central and hopefully accessible to all, and an avenue which goes straight, and like a road that goes straight to its destination. It doesn't meander or curve. And so I liked that concept as well. So there was a bit of thought, but yeah. I mean,
in fairness, it's a really good name. It gets across what it's trying to say. Really well. So. So even if it was a very sort of straightforward beginning, I think it's not too embarrassing.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So Miranda asks, what book were you most excited to publish? So I guess that ties in a little bit to being not able to pick a favorite child, but was there ever one that you got really buzzed for? So I was very excited, and I still am very excited about Disconnected. This is it right here. That one to me was such a challenge to work on. And I mean, I was kind of fangirling as well, because I got to work with these people who I'd been following on social media. I was like, are they going to like me? Like, I asked all those stupid questions that we ask ourselves when we're insecure. I was really excited to work on that. What else? So I'm going to show you another one. Had stacks of books here, and I can't find. Oh, this one. Okay, this is I would call it like upmarket or women's fiction, about three women who come together in post-genocide Rwanda. And so when the query for this book crossed my desk a few years ago, I was so excited to read it, because I've always had this, ever since the genocide and hearing about it, I was amazed that this kind of thing could happen in the modern world. Because to me, this is what happened 50 years ago or 60 years ago. But it had just happened. So I've always had this odd fascination with the idea that humanity could exact such horror on itself. Right. And so when the book crossed my desk, I was like, oh, please let this be good, because I really want to publish this book. And it was. And it truly is amazing. Wow. It approaches the genocide without being gratuitous or it was a great book. So I was very excited to publish that. But honestly, I get really excited about every book that's coming out, because each one is kind of like gambling in a way. You've taken all this money and time, and you're like, okay, here goes, and you let it go into your world, kind of like letting the dice go, and you just hope that it finds readers and finds homes. Yeah, absolutely. Well, that sounds like an incredible book. Wow. Oh, thank you. Yeah, she's done well. Yeah. Yeah, I'd say so. That sounds amazing. Yeah, awesome. Okay, so we're getting loads in here.
I'll make shorter answers. I'll have shorter answers.
Yeah. No, that's okay. No, take your time. I'm just, I'm not going to talk too much myself in response. So Casey asks, did you face any hardships when you decided to set up your own independent publishing company?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I remember I made $900 the first year. 900. Cool. So there was financial hardship for sure. Now I'm not going to tell you that I was, poor and living on food stamps or whatever. I'm married. My husband was working. So I was able to, he made enough money to pay for groceries and the mortgage. Right. So that was great.
Yeah.
But I would say the biggest hardship was learning everything, because I didn't have a lot of cash. I didn't have any cash to start this business. So all growth had to come organically. And so what that means is that I had to do everything myself. I couldn't afford to hire a bookkeeper. I couldn't afford to learn how to code ebooks or how to typeset or learn Photoshop or whatever. So I would say the hardship came in with having to teach myself all those things and see the reviews come back and say, wow, this book really could have used a good editor. And I was like, oh, I edited that book. Or, wow, the cover on that book really sucks. And so that was heartbreaking in a way, because you work so hard on something. And no, I'm not a graphic designer and I'm not the best editor in the world. And so it was really hard to see those reviews come in, because I felt like I had failed the authors. Because I couldn't afford to hire an amazing editor. Now I can, which is great. And so I do feel like these books get better shots because I can hire designers for the covers, and I can hire an editor to make sure that, the commas are all in the right place. So I would say that's where the hardship came, was everything that I read that was negative, I took straight to my heart. And that was really hard to get over.
Yeah.
It was like the highs were really high and the lows were so low.
Yeah. But sure, look at you now.
I still get bad reviews though. Still get bad reviews. But I
don't read them.
No, I learned to have a thicker skin now.
Yeah. Okay, so so Becky says, I love how Disconnected is edited. Did you enjoy interacting with the poets? And did they enjoy the experience of working with each other? So I guess you talked a little bit about that before, but the relationships were so different. Like, I mean, Cyrus Parker and Amanda Lovelace are married, aren't they? And then and then some people had never met before. So that must have been interesting. Yeah.
So I did mention about what it was like to work with them, which was wonderful. But the tangible event where I saw all this come together was last year at Book Expo and BookCon in New York City. I brought 5 of these people together for some events. They spoke on a panel at BookCon and Book Expo and at the Strand Bookstore, which is in New York City. And they all came to New York on their own dollar. I mean, I don't have a publicity budget. I had put together the events, but I was like, if you can come to New York, if there's any way, I would so appreciate it. Yeah. And so they did. They came to New York. There was Amanda Lovelace, Trista Mateer, Ian Thomas, Nikita Gill, Cyrus Parker, K.Y. Robinson. And then there were a whole bunch of other poets that were kind of part of their, maybe their peripheral working group or something like that. But it was really neat seeing them all come together. And they all said after, not necessarily to me, but I kind of heard about it, that it was a really special time that they got to spend together. They had worked together online or seen each other via Skype or whatever, but it was spending that time together in New York that brought them closer together. And I loved seeing that. It's kind of like almost felt like this like mother hen, or they're gonna laugh when they hear me say all this, because I think it was Amanda that was calling me mom that week because I was like shoveling them all around. But it was really neat to see that come together. And there were projects that came out of that. Amanda, Nikita, and Trista all published a book that came out recently this year called Dragon Hearts. So yeah, it was really cool to see them resonate with each other and come together.
Awesome. That's so nice. So we actually have a question that follows on quite well from that. Jet asks, how do you balance making demands on authors with taking care of them? So that's kind of an interesting one.
Yeah. Yes. So, and that kind of goes along with the, with having to deliver bad news as well. Or when you have to go back to someone and say, listen, I need a lot of edits. Because some people, like, this is something that someone has put a lot of effort into, and it can, you know, when someone comes back with critique, you never know how it's going to be taken. So I guess I try to, no matter what, I try to say that this is the book that we're working on together is a partnership, and it's one of mutual respect, where I respect what you have done and you respect what I'm going to tell you or say.
Yeah.
And that it's a collaborative project, that it's iterative, that it goes back and forth, and that along the way we both have to feel good about it. Because I've heard nightmare stories from authors who work with editors who are horrid to work with. And maybe those editors get great results, I don't really know. But I'm always very careful to respect the author and their vision. But then I do expect that they would see my point of view as well. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of taking care of them, I don't know if I ever have to take care of them too much, but, you know, if I have to deliver a bad review. So, for example, just today, I had to send an author a review that came back from Kirkus that was less than great. And I said, you know what? This is just one person's point of view. And, you know, if you go on NetGalley and look at all of the reader reviews, they're all giving you 4 and 5 stars. So I think that's how you deliver bad news and good news in the same email. Yeah, it's that kind of balance. Yeah,
absolutely. Great. And Nathaniel asks, how much does an author's following influence your decision to publish them?
Like on social media? I guess
so, yeah.
Not all that much. And the reason I say that is because for a couple of $100, you can buy thousands of followers.
Yeah.
So when I'm taking on so when I take on work, it's all agented except for poetry. And with poetry, what I do is I do my own research, and I follow poets, or I'm exposed to poets. And then I go and I look and see, okay, well, if you have 100,000 followers, how many of those are real? So then I'll use an auditing website to get an idea of how many are real. And I'll look at the comments. I'll look at who the followers are. I'll check out other platforms. More often, if they've self-published a book, like on Amazon, I'll look and see how many sales they've got. So I'll look at the official sales numbers or the rankings. Yeah. So not if you have 500,000 followers, I'm going to find out how many of those are real first.
Do your homework, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So Becky said, what was your favorite review or comment about Disconnected?
Becky, that's a good question. I don't know if I can remember. Oh, I know what it was. And it wasn't just from one person. It was from a few others. It was that they said that they found some other poets to read. So they were fans of a Nikita or Amanda or Ian, but in reading this, they were like, oh, I'm going to go check out Arch Sweeney or Sarah Bond or one of the other as yet known poets. And that made me feel really good. That made me feel like I had achieved what I had set out to do.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Christy says, how do you know when a book is right for Central Avenue? With something along as long as a novel, how soon is soon enough to tell? So I guess you said about 3 chapters in, but would it ever take you longer to figure it out, or would you sometimes know from the first page?
So normally I know within 3 chapters if I'm going to read the whole book and want to meet the author. But I'll tell you a story about this book, Rome, which is a YA novel about homelessness, and it just came out this month. This book was submitted to me a few years ago. C.H. Armstrong submitted it through her agent a few years ago. And I was like, this is a really neat concept, teen homelessness, and trying to hide it from, trying to live a normal life and not let your new friends know that you're living in your mom's van. And so I read the book and I was like, ooh, that didn't work out the way that I wanted it to. Yeah. And so I went back to the agent and the author and said, I would look at this again if you make these edits. And I almost never do this. Like because I just don't have time to critique every book that comes in.
Yeah, exactly.
So they resubmitted it and I was like, done, I'll publish it. Because I read through, I was like, that's exactly what I wanted to see. And this book went to a second printing before it even came out. It was a week before it came out, and I ran out of stock. And I was like, wow, this is great. So that's an example of how sometimes I think I might think it's right. It might be right, but it needed edits. That's pretty rare. A lot of times I can take it, the way it is, and then we just work on editing in the process.
Yeah. Fantastic. That's great. So aspiring writers, take note.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so Michelle, we should probably wrap it up now, not keep you too much longer. But what is next for you and for Central Avenue?
What is next? I guess more of the same. In general, I release about 10 to 12 titles a year. So fall is going to bring 2 books of poetry, one by Trista Mateer and one by Far Away. Another volume of Disconnected. I have a new adult bisexual love story, which is an awesome title. That's in September. And then I have a literary fiction title coming as well called Into Captivity They Will Go, which is a book kind of about, it's about a boy whose mother has told him he's the second coming of Christ, and what that kind of belief will do to a person's psyche and their lifetime. Yeah. So it's, so all of these books I'm very excited about. I'm expecting good things for all 6 of them. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, that's super exciting. And so where can we find you and Central Avenue online?
Okay, so Central Avenue Publishing .com is the website. And on social media, I am Cent Av Pub. So CENTAVEPUB.
Perfect. And I'm sure that we will link your social medias in the comments as well. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and it's been an absolute pleasure, Michelle. And we can't wait to have you on again for the next iteration of Disconnected, and hopefully everything else as well.
Oh, thank you so much, Laura Blaze. I had a good time.
Great. Bye.
Bye.